Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to do a little bit of cleanup and prep for the next video, and in the next video is when we'll finally introduce the logic that determines which tokens get flipped when another token gets placed on the board. So first, the cleanup. Right now, if you run this, if you click on a square, a token appears. Great. The problem is if you were to click on that square again, even though you shouldn't, if you do, another token appears. And this is typical when it comes to any kind of application. You really need to protect against things that the player should not be doing. Whether it's intentional or accidental, you have to put controls in place to make sure they don't do things that they're not supposed to. So the general reason why this is being placed here is because we're not tracking anything. We're drawing an image on the screen, but we're not really tracking from a data point of view that that exact tile, that exact square, has a token on it. The technical reason, the more specific technical reason, is all that we're doing is we're checking for a click on the box collider. So what we can do is when a token is placed, we can then disable the box collider, and at that point, no more tokens will be placed. And disabling the box collider actually serves double duty for what we're going to do in the next video. So what we do is we come to our click-con script, because that is what's attached to the box. This is the Onmousedown section, so this executes when there is a mouse click on the box. What we're going to do is we're going to do get component, because the box collider is a component. So box collider, and make sure you're doing the 2D version. And then enabled equals false. So just like that, what you've done is you've said that in addition to instantiating the token and changing the color for the next token, you're now saying that the collider box for where you've clicked has now been disabled. So if you click on it again, nothing will happen. So we're going to copy that. We're going to paste that here. Because again, we're taking the approach that either everything happens or nothing happens. That's why we're not putting anything outside of the if statements. So even though it would be a little bit less redundant, in an application this small, you really don't have to worry about how resource intensive it is. So let's go ahead and check that. So let's run it again. And so we click on a box. And now we click on another one. And again, I'm clicking, and nothing's happening. So, mission accomplished. We can now prevent multiple clicks on the same box, an occupied box. That way it doesn't overwrite a previous placed unit. Now, for what it's worth, that ability to disable a component, that actually applies to a lot of different components. So even though we're using it in this context, it certainly can be applied to different other components. Like maybe you're disabling a rigid body because you don't want there to be any velocity, or maybe you're disabling the sprite component so something becomes invisible, whatever. Just keep in mind that that disabling of a component in real time is very viable to make certain things happen. Okay, so we've disabled that, we've closed that gap. This now works a little bit more like it should. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add some identifying information to the tokens. So right now, again, it's visually a white token, but there's really nothing tracking which token it is other than the visual appearance. So we're going to start adding a little bit to this. Now, there's something known as a tag. A tag is a means of identifying similar objects. So maybe you have, say, 10 enemies that do all exactly the same type of damage, even though they look different and they act different. So what you could do is you could create a tag for all those 10 enemies. All 10 enemies would have the same tag, and then say if a collision occurs, based on the tag would determine how much damage is done. So basically, a tag is a way of creating a category. So what we're going to do, we already said that we have a variable that states which turn is being placed, W or B. So let's keep using that same verbiage. So we'll go to tag. We're going to do add tag, and add in tag just creates a tag. It doesn't actually link the tag. And we're going to use the same verbiage. In this case, it's just a letter. There's W and there's B, and they're lowercase. So let's go back to our prefab. And now we're going to actually apply that. So white will get W. Back out of that one. And black will get B. So now we have a string that matches the turn name. And that's going to come in handy. Again, this is prep for what we're going to do in the next video. Okay, so now we've added tags. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add colliders. So for both these objects, these prefabs are going to go into them again, and this time add the collider. So we're going to go to Open Prefab. We're going to go to Add Component. We're going to go to Physics 2D, and we're going to go to Circle Collider 2D. It needs to be a trigger. If you want, you can kind of tweak the size in a little bit. You just grab one of the control points. And then you simply go to the other one and do the same thing. So you're clicking on the prefab, you're opening the prefab, you're adding component, Physics 2D, Circle Collider 2D. You're setting it as a trigger so it can detect a mouse click. You're doing Edit Collider, and we're just shrinking this in. You might not have to do this shrink stage. All depends what size of image you're using. And we can always come here if it turns out that this is too big. Okay, so far so good. We have cleared up the glitch. We have added a collider to both of the tokens, and we have now added a tag to both of those tokens. All of that is going to come in handy in the next video. And the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a new object, which is going to be used in the next video. So, game object, 2D object, sprite. We'll call this probe UL for upper left. So in short, what we're going to do is when you place a token in each of the 8 directions, a probe will be sent out to see what tokens are in each direction and then change them accordingly. So in the final version, the probe is not going to be seen. This is purely to demonstrate how the functionality is working, and this is purely also for debugging to make sure it's working correctly. So for demonstrative and debugging purposes. So for the moment, there'll be a sprite, but we'll eventually remove this component or at least disable it. So we're just going to use the Othello chip. And then we are going to shrink this because this is way too big. So let's make it like 0.15 and 0.15. We add a component. It's going to be Physics 2D. And again, Circle Collider like we did on the other ones. This one will also be a trigger. And I believe that should just about do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that probe, we're going to put it down here, and we're going to delete it from the scene. So ultimately what we're going to do is when the token is placed, a probe will be sent out in each of the 8 directions. So we're eventually going to make 8 different probes. So this one's upper left, one could be just up, the other one can be upper right. Whatever naming convention you want to use, you could use NW for northwest, N for north, and E for northeast. Again, really doesn't matter. It's just that you're trying to identify the 8 probes that are going to go out. So we're going to stop here. I usually don't like to stop in the middle of adding new functionality, but it gets a bit dicey, and I found myself kind of stumbling over my own words no matter how much I try to take notes ahead of time. So basically, as a preview, what's going to happen is we're going to use collisions to try to take information and transfer it from one variable to another, and then that information will be used to decide whether or not these tokens get flipped. Okay, so I think that's about it for this video. I hope you found it helpful, and like I said, the next video will finally get into the actual flipping of the tiles and how that logic is going to work. And we'll also talk about a couple alternatives because I'm sure there will be people who will take exception to the approach I took. And so we'll talk about a few other ways that you can go about it just briefly. And I believe that will about do it. And then the video after that, like I said, will be like the bells and whistles, adding a title screen, maybe adding scoring, add a timer, that kind of thing. Okay, so hopefully this has been helpful. If you liked it, please leave a like. If there's other features that you want to have added, just let me know in the comments. And that should about do it. So have a good day.